the Ukrainian army has carried out a very critical operation in the Black Sea region. The Russian soldiers have suffered a very big blow. While Putin is already having trouble getting his ships into the Black Sea region, he is now completely cornered. After these recent developments, the Ukrainian army has left the Russian soldiers helpless, and Putin has gone mad with rage. In the last days of the Ukraine-Russia war, the Ukrainian army achieved a very serious superiority. Putin, on the other hand, decided to make different moves when he could not succeed in the operations he organized from the ground. Since Putin wants to attack from the sea, he has begun preparations to launch attacks on important coastlines of Ukraine. Russian ships have started moving towards the port of Odessa, one of the most important coastlines of Ukraine. But the Ukrainian army responded in such a way that it was the hardest blow the Russian army has received since the war began. The Ukrainian army was now gaining strength every day. The biggest reason for this was the support given by the USA and Europe. After these aid deliveries, Ukraine has now taken action to organize larger operations. At the same time, by improving the Ukrainian intelligence network, it has gained a very serious advantage over Russia. After that, the whole world began to wait for the next move from Ukraine. It was learned that Russian soldiers were moving towards the Odessa region, while the Ukrainian army was preparing to organize an operation. Thanks to the Ukrainian intelligence network, the Ukrainian army responded very harshly. According to Putin's instructions, Russian soldiers were planning to bombard Odessa first, and then send landing ships to the region and move towards Kiev immediately. After the Ukrainian army found out about this, it immediately began preparations. The Ukrainian army was going to make an unthinkable move. Thus, a big blow would have been dealt to the Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian army decided to use the most powerful weapons it received from the United States for this move. These weapons had the quality to completely change the course of the war. The weapons that Ukraine was going to use were HIMARS. The Ukrainian army had achieved great successes thanks to these weapons. But with the last operation he organized, he taught the Russian soldiers a lesson they never expected. The Ukrainian army first began to line up HIMARS on the coastline. However, Ukraine has taken measures for attacks on the coastline. Ukrainian soldiers decided to evacuate the port in Odessa when they learned that the Russian army was in action. When two Russian ships and a Moscow cruiser approached the area, Ukrainian soldiers took charge of the HIMARS and began to wait for the Russians to arrive. After that, the Russian ships anchored near the port and immediately went on the offensive, and he sent missiles decently to the port of Odessa. The port of Odessa received a lot of damage. Russian soldiers began to approach the region thinking that they had destroyed the port of Odessa, but the Ukrainian army suddenly took action, and Russian soldiers anchored in the area had become an open target. That's why the Ukrainian army started firing back-to-back with HIMARS. When Russian soldiers noticed this Ukrainian attack, everything changed. The Russian soldiers, who did not expect such an attack, were puzzled what to do. The Russian military realized that Ukraine was cornered because of its HIMARS. That's why the Ukrainian soldiers kept sending missiles repeatedly while the Russian military was trying to decoy the ships. And very soon after, the Moscow cruiser of the Russian ships was blown up. Thus, the whole world saw how desperate the Russian army was in a desperate situation. After these attacks, the Ukrainian army has added another one to its advantages. The Ukrainian army, which is now superior in many respects, has completely changed the moves of the Russian soldiers. Even after this defeat, the Russian army was unable to maintain ships in the Black Sea. After the recent events, it has become a matter of curiosity how Putin will follow the path. After the recent developments, the comments made by war analysts have caused great repercussions all over the world. According to the comments of war analysts, the Ukrainian army has gained the upper hand in many regions. And at this rate, it was only a matter of time before the Ukrainian army won the war. At the same time, as a result of increasing embargoes on Russia, Putin is cornered. The support to the Ukrainian army was increasing every day, but Putin was becoming more aggressive as he suffered defeats. This unstable and combative attitude of Putin put the Russian soldiers in an even more difficult situation. Following Putin's attitude, many countries, especially Western countries, have taken action against Russia. At the same time, the G7 countries also held a meeting and acted to support Ukraine and stop Putin. After this meeting of the G7 countries, all the balances of the war would change. After these defeats, Putin took action to make completely different moves. His threats, especially with nuclear weapons, have brought the whole world to its feet. Although Putin was looking for allies at the same time, he could not find any. After that, he became very angry and took action to send some of the nuclear weapons to Belarus. The whole world, especially Ukraine, was very angry about this situation. When Putin realized that his power was in danger, he began to exhibit aggressive attitudes. Some countries have become quite nervous about Putin's threat of nuclear weapons. And 3, they were worried about the outbreak of World War II, because after this step, many countries would get involved in the war to support Ukraine. Following the recent developments, 2 very critical decisions were taken at the meeting of the G7 countries. These resolutions envisaged providing more support to Ukraine, while the second resolution included the imposition of severe sanctions on Russia. Since Putin is aware of this situation, he has narrowed down the steps he is taking against the Ukrainian army, and Putin ordered all his soldiers to move to a defensive position. However, support for the Ukrainian army came from an unexpected country. After this support, it was revealed again how much Putin has failed in foreign policy. After this aid arrived, the Ukrainian army was expected to organize much more critical operations. At the same time, this country, which supports Ukraine, surprised the whole world. The country that announced that it would support Ukraine was Japan, a member of the G7. Since the beginning of the war, Japan has stated many times that it is neutral. But he could no longer withstand Putin's threats in Japan. Previously, it had provided approximately $550 million in humanitarian aid to the Ukrainian army, and Japan has added another one to these supports. So now the Russian army has no chance left. This aid package announced by Japan would completely change the course of the war. Japan has increased the support it has provided so far by a full 11 times. Because he wanted the war to end in Japan now. That is why he started to give very serious support to the Ukrainian army. After that, since Ukraine is now financially comfortable, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky gave the good news. Russian soldiers on the territory of Ukraine began to experience very big problems. In fact, they have become unable to shelter on Ukrainian territory anymore. The Russian army, which suffered consecutive defeats in hot clashes, continued to lose even when they moved to a defensive position. The main reason for this was the support to the Ukrainian army. Thanks to these supports, the Ukrainian soldiers continued to add strength to their strength. However, the Ukrainian army began to attack more strategic areas. Ukraine has prepared HIMARS missiles with the aim of attacking units of soldiers in Russia, providing logistical support. The convoys that Russia lost were used by the Ukrainian army. Since these convoys, which the Russian army lost, were of very critical importance, the Russian soldiers found themselves in a very difficult situation. After the advantages gained by the Ukrainian army, it moved to organize a very large operation against Russia. After this operation of the Ukrainian army, Putin may face losing his power,